this book. Did you guys finish it?
I did.
No,
I
didn't.
didn't.
I know,
No,
it's not
not
that I
yet.
don't want to
Not
finish
yet.
it. I'm still working on it. Like
Yeah.
I'm actively reading it. I'm just, lots going on right now. And so I read like little chapters and I digest and I think about it. And I feel like that's just better for me anyways. I don't want to sit down and plow through the whole thing. So
No.
I am still working on it, but I'm actively working on it. I should get it done by the time we talk about the fan episode. So by that point, but I'm enjoying it. Yeah. Everyone else?
I finished it. I found it kind of fast. I kind of did the opposite, I think, of you. I did like big reading sessions and stuff. I found it kind of fast, I guess. I was worried that it was going to take me a really long time because of the subject matter. I thought it would be like one of those, if I read a book that's got a lot of trauma in it, it's kind of like reading the book and then like depression and then like trying to get back to it and like this kind of and I don't know if it says something about me that was not my experience of this book, or maybe that's why I kind of did it in big chunks. Not that I think that it, like thinking back, I probably did have some like depression. I mean, we were talking also a lot about truth and reconciliation in our house because of Truth and Reconciliation Day and because of Orange Shirt Day with my kids, because they're very interested. And like that's a tough conversation too, because you're they want to know everything. And you still have to try to make it age appropriate in a way. But like, you know, my kids, they just dig and dig and dig. They know when it's being age appropriate and they want details. And so we try to
give us those details outside of our age range.
Oh man, always. But then they picked out the orange shirt story, and it's by Phyllis Webstad, who had the orange shirt that was taken away when she went to that's got beautiful artwork. But anyway, so I was maybe a little bit like entrenched in the whole subject matter.
So it was almost like normalized for you at that time instead of being.
That's what we were doing.
Yeah.
Like, I'm reading and I'm trying to answer questions. So they're asking questions and then I'm reading and trying to answer questions too at the same time, so.
Can you tell me before, Kim, you say something, what's the story of the orange shirt? And I don't know that.
Right. So Phyllis Webstad is an Indigenous woman, but when she was a kid, she had to go to residential school. And so before she went, her grandmother took her to town and let her pick out a shirt, and she picked out this beautiful orange shirt, and she was excited to go to school. Like everybody I know goes, and I want to learn to read. And it was an exciting thing for her. The ideas that she had about this, what going to school would mean. And when she got there, they took it away from her, they cut her hair, and and then she experienced kind of like the residential school system with like the coldness and it was not what she was expecting, and she never got it back. And so that story and the symbolism in the story and everything, that kind of started why we were wearing orange shirts on Orange Shirt Day. That's why they're orange. Is this story kind of started that wearing an orange shirt to raise awareness.
I felt like I read this book like I read all books. I try to do the chapter. And if they're super short chapters, sometimes I'll read more than one chapter. These chapters I felt were longer. I think there's only 14 chapters in the whole book, if I'm not mistaken. So I just read it a chapter at a time. And like, I want to tread lightly, but considering preconceived notions, because this book is about an individual's experience at residential school, similar to Mare, I didn't find it like, I don't want to take away from the experience that the author had and any Indigenous person at a residential school had, because obviously it was horrific. But to read this book, it was safe for me to take in the information. The way that she told the story was in such a way that it allowed me to continue reading. And I mean, she's not censoring anything, like it's all in here, but it wasn't as, I thought, like, I want to say like it wasn't as painful or it wasn't as hard, but I don't, when I say those things, I feel like I undermine the experience of people who went to residential school. So I don't want that to be the impression that I leave. But I also want to encourage people to read this book because it is readable, I guess, is the best way to say it. Go ahead.
I know what you're thinking, because I've been thinking about this too, because I was like,
Okay.
the subject matter is upsetting and stuff. She's telling the story, And it's like she's not trying to manipulate your feelings. You know how sometimes you're reading a fiction and the author is trying to manipulate your feelings so that you feel the feelings they want you to feel. But it's like this book isn't trying to manipulate you in any way. It's just giving you the story. And so you're taking in this information in kind of a factual way. And then later on, when you think about the facts, that's when your feelings kind of come up. You're not being manipulated into feeling the feelings. You'll have the feelings.
That's
right?
a great way to put it.
I have another point because I've been thinking about this a lot too, because of the tone of the book. But there is a section in the book where she talks about how being in residential school made her, unfortunately, taught her not to ever express her emotions when she felt pain, physical, emotional, or otherwise. And there's a section in the book where she went to that physiotherapist and they put those electrodes on her and told her if they hurt, let them know. And it burned her so severely. And when the guy came back, because he smelled flesh burning, he's like, why didn't you stop it? Why didn't you say anything? And she said she felt stupid, but she had been so conditioned not to express emotional pain, any pain whatsoever. She just let it happen. So I was thinking after reading that part of the book and then other parts where she knew she wasn't expressing her emotions, even though she was having them, that maybe the reason this memoir is neutral and even no matter what information she's telling you is because she's been traumatized not to have the ups and downs and emotion, but always to remain neutral regardless of the content of the information she's
experiencing.
Sharing.
Or sharing.
Yeah.
Totally.
That's a good point.
It's really interesting, Sarah. And I also think that she gave, from what I've read, I mean, she also says the good things, but the things that she also, connected with certain people, or when they got to go outside, or different things like that. So I think there was some balance in her storytelling of not saying just everything was absolutely horrible all of the time. Here are some, things that I took from it that was good for me.
Here's the whole picture.
Yeah.
I really like what you said, Mara, because that helps me to understand my experience of the book. And it's exactly right. The story is told and it does what a good story does. It stays with you to reflect on later. And then you do have these deeper emotional experiences of the book if you take the time to reflect. So, and then to Lindsay, who is reading it slower, good, right? Because you're taking it in that way, and it'll probably be able to resonate with you. And I wouldn't say I read it fast or anything else, but because I was confused and concerned about how to share that I could read the book, but it isn't.
Is there something wrong with me?
Right?
Or it's not because it's not like my heart is black, but there's something about this book and the way it was delivered that it
was just matter of fact. She just kind of said the facts, just like Sarah said, that without all the emotion.
Yeah. And then when you think about it, it's really, really emotional.
Book interrupted. This interruption is brought to you by marijuana. So I went to pick up more Epsom salts, and normally I just get the plain kind. But they were all out of the plain kind, but they did have this. And when did we get to the point that pot is now in everything? And there's conversations happening with grandparents who tell me about the CBD oil and what their dosage is. And don't get me wrong, I love it. I think this is great. But I can't help but remember what growing up was like before marijuana became legal. Book interrupted.
I didn't read the back, but I flipped to the back because I'm really bad and read the end of books before I finish them all the time. But I know I'm that person. People hate that. But there was there was notes or something. No.
Yeah.
But then it said
when
I was flipping through it about they had done some research or something, and that the inside of some of the residential schools were below freezing, which I thought was, you know, because she doesn't really, I mean, maybe she talks about it later, but the stuff that I've read, like she says it's cold, but she doesn't really say too much. But then at the end, she says more of those kind of facts.
How cold is cold?
Yeah, how cold is cold? That's cold.
Find out. Yeah.
Because you think cold and you're like,
freezing.
oh, okay, just grab a blanket or whatever. But then you're like, no, it's like minus.
It's extreme. Yeah.
It's extreme. Like
it's like the food. It's like the food. They'll say the food was inedible. Well, how inedible? Because it tasted bad? No, it was rotten.
Yeah.
Right? Like there's rotting food, right? Like it's actually, you shouldn't feed that to somebody. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of that.
Bringing it back to Sarah's observation, like that makes so much more sense now, right? Like she's saying all these things and she's also saying them in a way that like she can't complain and be like, isn't that outrageous? You know what I mean? But like, she's like, yeah, it was cold when we went to bed at night. Then later on you find like, oh, it was below freezing cold and rotten food and whatever, right? So it's just so, I guess, layered in its value. I don't know, maybe value is not the right word. It's just so layered in its gift, you know what I'm saying? Like in its essence.
Sure, but maybe it's also like, it's one of those things where learning, when you read a new book, you're learning how to read the book in the author's voice. And so that's something to know going into reading this book, is that when it's enough to note that it's cold, it's really cold. Otherwise she wouldn't have brought it up, right? Like, you know, she wouldn't have said it's cold if it was just a little bit chilly from time to time. You know, they wouldn't even talk about the food, somebody feeding the food to the pigs because they didn't want to feed it to the children.
I'm like understanding it right now even. You know what I mean? Like I hate that. What that means is that it was so brainwashed, beaten, you know, whatever word you want to use, out of the children to just accept the shit. You know what I mean? Like there's no voice for you, you know? It's just, that is like, it's really upsetting. So like, this book isn't nice anymore. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't nice in the first place, but like when you do this, like what we're doing right now, and you talk about it and you kind of understand, it's really upsetting.
Well, and then later on in the book, is you're still reading it, Lindsay, but you know, you read the end anyway, so it's not spoiler for you.
Go ahead.
No, so at the beginning she's talking about the residential school, and then later on she's talking about adult life, that the fallout of all that stuff. And she's talking about when people get arrested, when adults get arrested, they'll just say they're guilty even if they're not, because they were taught that nobody cares anyway. Just because of like your heritage, you'll be assumed guilty, so you might as well just say you're guilty. And so that kind of thing too, where it just snowballs, or you know, people not talking about it was also, you know, that's why it's so good that it's being talked about now. And it's you know, that because people were taught not to talk about it. We don't care about your feelings or what you think, just take the shit and be quiet about it. Yeah.
And like the other thing too about talking about the adults and how, you know, the people around her fared one way or another, it's like, it's not over, right? It like residential school wasn't like a moment in time. It's like a life sentence, and a generational, like not just one person's life either. The residual impact of the like training, I guess you would say, at those schools is still being worked out today, even though they've been closed since what, 96?
And
you know what else it said too that I think was interesting for, first of all, Indigenous knowledge and like more validation, because Indigenous knowledge, and especially like Indigenous science, is not like recognized by traditional settler science, because we're all like math and make it add up, right? But Indigenous knowledge, it's not like proof. It's just like, no, we know. And the proof is in our millions of years of knowing this, right? It takes 7 generations for the kind of effects of the trauma to be out. It's not, maybe it wasn't even in this book that I learned that. It might have just been in a presentation on trauma and ACEs and whatever, like when there was a research done on, I think it was like mice who got shocked, and they made a smell happen when the mice got shocked. And so the children of those mice, when they smelled that smell with no shock, still had a reaction, like, uh-oh, right? Like
right. We're talking about like epigenetics.
Exactly.
Like an epigenetic marker
and it
on
lasted
trauma.
for 7 generations. Mice, the children of the children of the children of the mice, still had the same response to the smell. And I just thought it was interesting that it was 7 generations, because that's a lot of Indigenous kind of spiritualities around like 7 generations backwards and 7 generations forwards. Like, we're not living for ourselves today. We're living for the 7th generation from us to make sure the world is good for them.
I have another chimism that goes along with this, because I'm not sure where I read this either. And I don't know if it was this book or a different book or a website or whatever. Again, I've been doing a lot of reading from different things around this subject, but it was talking about cultural genocide, and that once the cultural genocide stops, it takes at least 40 years for the culture to start like recovering, like to get back to where it's getting into recovery. And the point, it might have been a website, the point that this person was making was that it hasn't stopped yet, because there's still the systemic racism in like the whole culture, Canadian culture as a whole, that still hasn't stopped that. So, we're on this road to healing, but it is going to take a while.
So Squiggy had suggested at some point the book 7 Fallen Feathers, because of the 7. There's a whole prophecy about colonialism, about the settlers coming, and about the 7 associated with it. And that's why this book is about 7 murdered Indigenous children in North Bay. And when it reached 7, this woman, she works for the Toronto Star. She started doing an investigation on it. This book's excellent, actually, she goes into residential schools. She goes into murdered and missing Indigenous women. She goes into the high suicide rates of Indigenous children from the age of 10 to 18, which is 10-year-old. And anyway, there's lots of horrific stuff. But what she talks about is the high levels of racism that these children experience when they come from their remote northern residences to North Bay, because they have to go there for high school. And all the ways the community is trying to help them adapt into North Bay because they have to go there. But the amount of racism, like it's the level is so high. I'm halfway through the book, but people like throw rotten eggs at them and call them horrible things, like go back to where you came, go back to your res, or drunk Indians. Like the one woman, her son was missing. She called the police station and they said he's probably still at the party when he went missing. She's like, he's not at the party. He's drunk somewhere. He must be drunk somewhere. And they didn't even start the missing persons for 6 days. What? For 6 days. Like, it's just, anyway, so I think They Called Me Number One's a really great starter book to get into residential schools, because you can take in the information and also it'd be great for schools, because like you said, discussing all the individual parts really starts opening up what she's saying, and discussing it that's where the sorrow, right, and the empathy and the how can this happen comes from. But then going to books like 7 Fallen Feathers or 5 Little Indians or the Truth and Reconciliation documents, I think this is a good stepping stone, because you're getting into the information about all the horrific things and then going into what people are still experiencing now.
If you've enjoyed these video highlights, listen to the full episode on our YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts. Remember to like and subscribe and ring that bell to be notified when new episodes are published. Find out more by going to www.bookinterrupted.com.
Never forget, every child matters.